Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the Soft Landing Podcast, a gentle space for self-discovery. We are your hosts,
Rafaella
and Eric. This week, we are traversing the air currents of sexual fluidity, and there might be some turbulence, so strap in your strap-on as we navigate the complexity of sexuality. And be assured, we will make a soft landing.
Love it.
Thank you. So, really excited for this topic. I feel like this is also a really great segue from our last episode because, we're talking about sexual liberation and freedom. And I think that goes right into the whole piece around sexuality and fluidity around it. So I'm really excited to dig into it.
Me too.
Yeah.
There's so many places we can go.
There are.
And I'm really excited to see where it goes and where the conversation takes listeners as well. Because I think it's a topic that can feel so rigid.
Yes.
And when we talk about fluidity or we try to be more open with our sexuality, it's like we run against these barriers, be it like from society, from family, from religion, from friends, from memes, from like whatever the case. So, I'm really glad that we have this space to just put it all out there.
I agree. Yeah. We're more than just the Kinsey scale. Great piece for what it was back then, but we can get beyond that.
We can do better.
We could do better.
So, to start off this week, I would love for us to chat about how we have come to conceptualize our own sexuality.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. Ooh, that is a big question as we're talking about this for people. Thinking about it for myself. I feel like this is taking you back to so many different points in time, and that's a really great question. So first off, I want to start. I know for me personally, I knew at a very young age that I was attracted to men. Like probably 5-6 years old. I was like looking at people and being like, I'm into men's bodies and things and all that kind of stuff and what I was seeing out in the world.
Yeah.
And so, I was also raised in a very small rural town in Northwest Florida.
Okay.
So, I feel like for a really long time, I kind of then like buried that, and kind of was like, I'm nothing.
Can I ask, as you think about that?
Yeah.
Was your community like silently homophobic? Like we don't talk about queerness, and so you learned from the silence, like, oh, this is not something I should talk about? Or was it more avert, like, no, homosexuality is bad, and ooh, those people are kissing, why are they kissing, like that type of thing. So like what was the vibe in your town?
It was a bit of both, right? I think definitely within my family, it was like we don't really talk about it. We don't really touch on that subject. I think outside of that, in the world that I went into after I left home, there was like a mix. Kids are kids, and they be saying things, and they be doing things. It's definitely like, this is not safe for me to share these things. And so I definitely kind of recognized all these pieces and was like, for my own like safety, like I felt like I had to bury this, right?
Yeah.
I had to not engage with it. And so it wasn't until, probably like college where I was really starting to like actually then own it and like come to terms with like all the other stuff that kind of happened before then and getting to a place where I was able to start sharing with people like, this is how I identify. Like, I am not straight. I am not this thing that, which I mean, to be fair, I was probably like a glass closet. I didn't try very hard.
You're like, I'm going to be nothing, but also it's very clear that
I wasn't trying to date any girls. There were like, I think also in my head, I was like, I don't want to have a beard, which for people who don't know, a beard is like someone who might be closeted, who dates someone of the opposite gender to protect their like queerness or homosexuality.
And that person would be considered the beard.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I just never felt okay with that personally because, I was just like, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather just be me. And there were definitely like
just be single and
and just exist. And I definitely had people ask me throughout school, like, "Are you gay?" And I'd be like, "No."
What you mean?
What you mean?
How'd you ask me that?
I remember one time I was hanging out with some friends who also are like very queer now, and was the first time I was even like, I think I might be a little bisexual.
Just dip a toe in real quick. See what the vibe is.
Yeah.
How people respond.
Yeah, and so, really having those moments. But I think for me too, it was then, getting more comfortable in my skin, surrounding myself with other people, especially in college, who also were queer or trans-identified people, who just made me feel safe to be able to show up the way that I felt like I wanted to feel seen, like we've talked about, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, just getting to this place where, back then I said I was gay. Now I say I'm queer because even though I have like almost exclusively been with like people who identify as men, male-bodied people, I also recognize that I have other attractions, and so that there are possibilities out there that I necessarily won't show myself off to, given the right context.
Okay.
Right? And
how did you come to that awareness?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Okay. Story time. So I do know one moment in undergrad. I was hanging out with some friends. We were hanging out and stuff, and we were sipping a little something, and I ended up making out.
It'll get you every time.
It will. And I ended up making out with one of my friends, woman, and then one of the other people here with also a woman. And I was very turned on, right? I was literally at one point, I was like, we got to stop, because I feel like we were all like virgins. We never had sex before in that context. And I was like, I think we need to stop, because I identify as gay, and I don't want like your first time to be with someone.
I'm seeing this thread or this theme of you also considering other people's experience, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to, put on a front or
Right.
kind of have this identity by dating a woman to protect myself. And how would that make her feel?
Exactly.
What would she feel looking back? Like, oh, this person was gay, or I slept with someone,
Yeah.
So, I see you.
I try.
Care for other people.
I definitely try to lead with
Setting
that.
boundaries.
Yeah. But it was so funny too, because there were like other friends there too. They were all just like, Eric, we thought you were gay. I go, I thought so too, but I guess I'm not as exclusively gay as I thought. And I think that was like a great moment for me of like, oh, it was a great lesson of things aren't as strict or as simple as we think they might be, right? And so I think from there too, just continue to get to know other people, continue to just meet different types of people, and recognizing what was coming up for me in those moments, right? In terms of attraction. And then really sitting with myself and reflecting on, what does that mean? What does that look like? How do I feel about that? And getting to this place of understanding for myself that, I tend to overall just be attracted to pretty masculine people. And so there were moments where there were people who were not male identified or male bodied, but also very mass presenting, and I'd be like, oh, hi. And then there were also some other people who were male bodied, and were the way they presented was something different, that also made me think, I like something about this, and I think it got to this place where I really wanted to be able to, again, get to this place of understanding for myself that while my specific behavior has been this one thing, that how I conceptualize my sexuality is from this place of wonder and curiosity.
I love that.
And then for me, the added piece of context, right? Because I don't want it to be I want to like have you as my experiment, but I want to be able to be open to different opportunities as they arise, and pursue them, with this energy of joy and pleasure and fun, rather
and curiosity
than
and
curiosity and openness,
yeah.
rather than, oh, I can't do this because of this and this. And so I think for me that was like a big, really cool like journey that I've been on for myself.
Oh, you're hitting on so many pieces that I also want to bring into the conversation.
Yeah.
The first one is around alcohol or substance use.
Yes.
And sexuality. Because, you know, I'm thinking of songs like, you know, I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It. And I know when I was in, what was that, high school, junior, or whatever, whenever it was.
Right.
It was kind of like when you're in the club, partying, having a good time, you're dancing with folks of the same sex. Most of the time, these are folks in more femme presenting or in female bodies who have that permission to twerk on their friends, you know, stuff like that, smack their ass and kiss and make out. And it's a fun, not even exploratory, it's just like a fun thing that we do. You know, sometimes it can be performative. You know, I've spoken to some folks who are like, well, the guys like it, so we thought it was hot or whatever, or they think it's hot. So I've met a lot of people, I've worked with a lot of people who question the validity of their attraction, their desires, or even their behaviors while under the influence of something.
Yes.
And the permission I like to give all of us is it's yours to decide. Like it could be, okay, I was under the influence of something and that doesn't really feel to align with my sober self.
Right.
So maybe I'm not interested in the other person, or maybe it was a little liquid courage and I do feel like I was able to do something I would not have normally done because of that situation.
Absolutely.
But I don't want people to feel like they have to box themselves in and to remain more curious about, all right, it happened.
Right.
How far into the curiosity do I want to go, or can I give myself permission to go to see, like, what does this mean for me? Does it mean anything for me? Do I want to do anything with it right now or not? Can I put it to the side and look at it from a distance? Because I also feel like there's so much pressure to figure out your sexuality.
There's so much pressure.
Like, you need to know for sure in the LGBTQIA plus community, where do you fit?
What's your letter?
What's your letter?
What's your assigned seating?
Exactly. And figure it out ASAP. And I would just love to be in a society where sexuality is just as fickle as what my favorite food is this month.
Yes.
You know, like, and it's
that.
Okay. Long as it's consensual and it's honest and you're having those conversations with folks in a timely manner, right? So that way we can decrease or eliminate people feeling like they're being dragged along or being hurt because of our whatever stuff we're going through. But like, can we have our phases where we're just like figuring it out and we don't even have to choose? It's like, oh yeah, you saw me with this type of person one day, and the next day or the next month or the next year, it's like, it's fine. And it doesn't mean that you don't know what you want and that you're inconsistent. It's like, no, what I want is the multiverse. Like, what I want is to be diverse and curious, and that is part of my sexuality, right?
I love that. Yeah. And that makes me think of this comic. Her name is Zainab Johnson. She's so funny. And she has this bit, let's see if I can remember correctly. Basically, she's like, oh, if like a woman, you know, she's 5 years ago, she had that, like, you know, she was with that stud, like, oh yeah, I remember, girl, when you were like with that, you were gay for like that 5 years, and now you married with a man. And I think the point was, then she said, but like for a man, we don't allow that, right? No. Like we don't go.
You're DL or undercover, or you haven't, you know, you're doing the thing because you don't have the courage to come out,
right?
And it's very, very different.
Yeah, and the whole point was like, we need to get to a place where we're like the same way. You can be like, hey, yo, Joe, you remember you were gay for those 5 months?
For 5 months? Or that night.
Yeah. You know? Yeah, it was really funny. She's a good one.
And also to, you know, also acknowledge, because not everyone has that experience. Not everyone's community or circle is open-minded like that. And they don't have that person or people saying it's okay. Like, oh, yeah, you remember that? No, they're like, see, what are you doing? You all over the place. You don't know what you want. You are out here confused. And that's what a lot of queer people, even if they are not like exploring and they've been very definitive of their sexuality, it's like they're confused. Yep. They don't know because their community or family wants them to be straight.
Yes.
And they can't accept it, you know. Anything else you want to say?
I think I'm good.
All right. So, when I think about the journey of my sexuality, I still have light bulb moments of like, gay as hell.
Yeah. I love those moments.
And I like saying stuff like that too, because I remember people saying that to me. So it's in a sense, it's like being able to own it now, even though in those moments I would dismiss it or deny it, or most of the time I would just joke it off, or things like that. But I just had a moment recently where I was thinking about back in the day, we were on AOL chat.
I love that. That makes me so happy.
Dial up.
Yes.
And I remember there was someone from school who was my homie.
Yeah.
But we were talking all the time. This also giving the vibes of like, how you can start to develop feelings for folks the more that you are in relationship with them, the more you talk to them. But specifically, I'm talking about chatting with folks online.
Yes.
And how it's just a different energy.
It can
right?
be,
So even though
sure.
this is my friend, we saw each other every day, there was something about those intimate conversations while we were online that made me start to like them, right? Like her. And, she was also going through her own sexual identity for, when I first met her, she was wearing, very much presenting as a teenage girl.
Right.
And then her style would change, like only wearing jeans and T-shirts, never anything too girly. And then it was starting to get more and more masculine. But even in between all of that, I'm like, I like her, And I remember telling her I liked her. And then I have like a block of like, then what? I probably need to do like a little EMDR.
Right. Let's unlock that little box.
What happened after I shared my feelings about that. And then I later just blocked that all out, and it wasn't until a couple years ago, and I'm like, I had crushes on folks, and there weren't a lot of times where I would share that, but I do remember that specific time. And then growing up, where even when I was dating guys, always like people would always like, you like girls, you're a lesbian, you're gay, and I'm just like, what? I'm in a whole relationship with you. Like, what's the problem?
What am I not doing right?
How do you know?
Yeah. It's like, I thought I was doing all the things.
I was doing all the things. And enjoyed it, right? But I think about those times. I think about family members questioning me all the time. I remember a specific family member like saying, I don't want you to be gay because then you'll go to hell, and you won't be there with me. And I'm just looking at her like, sis.
Yay, the religious trauma.
And just being like, this is weird.
Yeah.
First of all, weird. Because I know all your business. So if you feel like that part, like this is what you're singling out as a sin. Okay. But but so like having these call outs and declarations of my sexuality coming from outside that I was just like also not too pressed about at the same time, which I know why. Like I wasn't trying to be curious about it out loud.
Right.
I was fine with dating boys and dating men. And I was like, cool, I'm a straight girl. Back in the day we used to say strictly dick. I don't know. I have not heard that in a long time. But we used to say that.
I used to also say strictly dick.
Okay, so I think that's also like a Black community thing. But yeah, I used to say that, and I was like, yeah, this is me. Yeah. This is what I do. And when I got to college, I still wasn't really exploring my sexuality, but I was in a lot of queer circles, and I had a lot of friends who were studs, and people would ask me, are you gay? Why are you always hanging out with them? They're going to turn you out. That's another thing. We don't say that anymore now, but it's always this fear of being turned out.
Oof.
And in my head, I'm like, oh shoot, turn me out, flip me around.
Sure, why not?
Why not? But really, and that's where it was. So it's always like me saying like, I'm comfortable with, I'm not homophobic, and I don't have a preference, and I like everybody. Not saying like sexually, I'm friends with everybody. I can have gay friends, queer friends, and it doesn't mean anything about my sexuality. But whole time. Whole time I'm looking at her like, you just let me know. And after psychology class,
let me know.
We out of here.
Okay, Leah.
Listen. But yeah, and so, you know, as I reflected on even when I was in junior high or high school, whenever that was, and my friend was finding her identity a lot through fashion and then finally coming out.
Yeah.
And then like my friendship and attraction to studs and more masculine presenting people. It wasn't until maybe a couple of years ago I even heard about the term androphilia or being an androphile or androsexual,
Right.
which is someone who is attracted to men or masculinity or masculine presenting people, regardless of sex.
Yeah.
Biological sex. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense.
I'm right there with you. So this reminds me of another story from college. One of my friends, she was dating this girl from this rugby team, and I was so attracted to her. She was very masculine presenting, and I remember I told my friend this. I was like, I think she's so hot. Like, I just, you know, short. I think it's now called like the Caesar haircut. It was like that kind of cut, just well fitted, like clothing, very mass presenting. My friend said, Eric, that is the gayest thing I've ever heard you say, that you were attracted to this woman because of how masculine she's presenting. I was like, listen, I don't know what to tell you.
It is what it is.
I'm into it.
I'm into it. I'm into it.
Yeah.
And as I started meeting more people and just more gender expansive people.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, I'm pansexual because I really don't care. I like you as a person, and the conversations that we have, like I'm very much in that sense like sapiosexual, but more so in relational romantic attraction.
Right.
Sexual attraction, again, pansexual.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like if I like the aesthetic, I like the vibe, I like the presentation or whatever, it's like that. But when it gets to more like the romantic side of things, you know, it's more about relationship building and personality and how I get along with you. Yeah.
And I love that distinction. I definitely want to talk more about that in a little while.
And another thing, just speaking about romanticism, it's like I also realize how often I have very strong, for right now I'm going to call it romantic, but like romantic feelings for my friends.
Oh, yeah.
Especially like girlfriends.
Yeah,
you know, but it wasn't like sexual, and I didn't want a romantic relationship with them, but I would want to like dote on them and care for them and surprise them with gifts. I'm like, oh, we were in the mall and she said she liked this, I'm going to buy her this. You know, it's just like these little things, and I would just feel so much in my heart like romance for them. You know, but there was never like jealousy. I never wanted to be with them or anything like that, but I was just always so interested about that response or behavior. And one of those people, actually, I made a post a while, I don't know, whatever, but it was just like a queer post. And this person slid in my DMs. It's like, I always thought that we were both kind of queer. We just never, we never talked about it because we just didn't talk about it. But that was definitely someone I always felt like a romantic feeling towards.
I love that. And I really, I love the distinction between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. I think that is also a really important piece here that we can delve into. And I love this piece around the friendship thing. I am such a staunch person around really redefining how we think about friendships. I've often said, like, all of my really close friends that I have in my life, I'm attracted to them in one way or another. Right? Like, I think that we don't want to say that because it feels weird, of like, no.
Because people tend to go straight to sexual attraction, and there are so many different forms of attraction.
Attraction. And that's the reason why I want them in my life, is because of that attraction.
Can I also say one more thing about that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, what I tend to notice is that because we tend to say or hear or even feel attraction, we automatically go into the sexual world.
Right.
I think that's why we also are in relationships, like romantic sexual relationships, that we might not have been in otherwise, because we actually had an intellectual attraction,
right,
or an aesthetic attraction, or an emotional attraction with someone, but we're like, oh, if I feel this, that means it must be sexual. We should be in a relationship together, when it's like, maybe you should write poetry together.
Yes.
Maybe you should like start a band together.
Ugh.
Or maybe you should just hang out more and be friends. But so much of these intense feelings that can come up, I think we're taught that we should do something sexual with it. And that's not the case.
That is so true. That is a great point. I love it. Ooh, okay, so how about we take a break, and then we'll come back and jump into some more.
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome. And we're back. So I want to take us now to kind of talk about like the politics of sexuality, because, you know, for better or worse, it has been politicized. And I think that that also then plays into how people experience their own sexualities in the world around them too. Yeah. And so, you know, I want to start with this idea of compulsory heterosexuality, which I feel like you mentioned earlier, right? And like this need or feeling to perform heterosexuality to appease those around us.
Yeah. I'm just having like so many thoughts and realizations of like and feelings about that. Yeah. And grief. And I think when we are talking about any identity that we have, or didn't have access to for however long, we are talking about grief, right? We're talking about the loss of what could have been, you know, and then grieving that, you know, what would have been like to not have the shame, to not have to hide, to explore earlier and have these conversations. Who would we be, right? And then it's, you know, it sucks even more because even once you get there, you still have to navigate the politics of it that kind of take up unnecessary, like, space we would rather use for the fun, the curiosity, and exploration. But we have to deal with people's shame being projected onto us, or their questioning, or their violence.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, even though we're here now, we're still going through the grieving process, because I just can't be free because you care too much. This other person cares too much, and they're being judgmental. So all of that was just kind of coming up, where it's just so often we forget about it, and people, they kind of get caught off guard, like, but I'm out and I'm dating and I'm, you know, dressing in a way that's affirming to the way that I want to show up in this world. But what is this heaviness that I still feel? And we have to recognize that, so we can give ourselves the space to name, like, oh, there is a loss here, there's grief here.
I appreciate that, and that brought stuff up for me because you know, I was in the Peace Corps, and I was in a country where it was illegal to, you know, homosexual was illegal, and they were very clear of like, you really should not be disclosing this to people in your city, town, village, wherever.
It's like
not
safe.
It's not safe.
Yeah.
And going into it, like, I was like, I was, you know, leaving undergrad. I was also like a couple years out from undergrad as doing other stuff, and I felt very secure in myself at that point. So I was like, oh, it won't be a big deal. I can handle this. You know, I'd done a lot of work, got to a lot of realizations. I was like, I felt secure. But baby, let me tell you, once I got there, it was building a relationship with people and feeling like I couldn't fully share all of myself with them, was always holding back. Yeah. It became really difficult. And I wound up having conversations with the counselor there because of the struggles, and some other stuff too. But like, that was one of the things that we talked about. And, you know, she had her previous work as a grief counselor. She's like, this is grief. And like you said, like, mourning and grieving what could be and what never will be. And I think that's such an important piece to talk about too, because I don't think we do talk about or recognize that enough, that there's grief in that process. And
Yeah.
and like for me, even just naming it allowed me to then work to process it and to continue to process it, because I still cannot share
Yeah.
with them this thing, right? And so I really appreciate that. I think that's such an important piece that I truly was not thinking about when we walked into this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can't process what you don't name.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think, you know, then thinking about the structures that be, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, heterosexism is real, right? There's a lot of privilege in
Privilege and survival.
yeah,
You know, if we're talking about the witnessing, the seeing, the acknowledgement, and the structures that be, the policies that be, I mean, you're just talking about how it was illegal,
yes,
right? And how here in the States, you know, marriage has been illegal. It has been not an option for folks. So how many couples have struggled because they were not able to reap the benefits that come with marriage, right? Being able to put a partner on their insurance, or ensuring that, you know, someone can be a beneficiary, you know, things like that people have really struggled with financially, because that's our society.
Yeah.
And that being taken away, you know,
Yeah.
because of who someone loves and how they show up in the world. So when we talk about compulsory heterosexuality, it's, in one hand, you have to recognize why people choose what they do. Right? The factors that make them feel safer to come out, or make them feel like it's an option for them. Sometimes it's a matter of what is, I don't want to say what's real or what's fake, because, you know, what we do know sometimes is because of society messages, we then kind of spill that narrative into other people, like our friends, our family, and maybe they don't align. Maybe they've been silent because you did a great job of staying in the closet, and they would have never guessed, right?
Right.
Maybe you haven't, and they're just waiting for you to disclose, but they're ready to accept you, whatever. So I think we do have that role of like, okay, how much of this is me pulling from this societal narrative that this is not okay, and so I have to stay in this relationship so I can appear, you know, in this sexual identity, and how much of it is an assumption that I'm making.
Yeah.
Both can still be scary to learn, to figure out, like, okay, what is the risk here?
Yeah.
And am I going to be right or wrong? And what are the potential outcomes or consequences of me making that move? And they are not easy things to ask or determine. And I think now, because we feel like we're in this sexually liberated world, and it's like everyone can be, like, no one cares anymore if you're gay. Well, the fact of the matter is a lot of people do care.
I do.
Right? So, you know, we can't force people to come out or make them feel bad for being in the closet a little bit longer. Like, everyone has their reasons, and it's based on their level of comfort and safety. Yeah. And, you know, ideally we would love to create more spaces where it is safe for folks, even if it's in our space.
Right.
You can show up this way. But I think even with this, when we're talking about compulsive behavior or beliefs or expectations, how we can also do that to one another in the queer community.
Absolutely.
And that's why I always like to say, you know, we have created these spaces where it's like, we are open. This is a place you can just show up, be yourself, pick from the letters, switch them around, whatever the case is. But in some spaces, there still feels like I have to check a certain box.
Right.
Am I doing queer enough, right enough? Are people forcing me to come out for whatever reason? Or, you know, things like that, where it's just like, all right, y'all, are we just going to press people over here too?
Exactly.
But it does happen.
Yeah. No, I agree. Oh, there's so much I want to respond to. I'll start with that. I agree, because, you know, there's this idea of, like, with queer theory that was created, of really that things are kind of constantly changing and in flux, and, like, their definitions and labels are a bit meaningless because of that. And also the importance of having those labels to give, like, definition, to give that feeling of being seen, to give that, but then, creating all these things and then still reinforcing old behaviors within that we took from heterosexuality, right? Like, we're still forcing these edges, these hard edges on people, and not getting to this place of like, well, we have these things, but also on the queer theory side, like, do what you want,
do what you want. But also it needs to be this color.
Yeah. And so it's just this really weird dichotomy that I think we constantly are recreating. But
again, it's about survival, right? It's about being in the group.
Yeah.
And when you're in the group, you're more likely to survive. You're more likely to have access to resources. You're more likely to have, that community that can help you during a crisis situation. And, I really long for and strive for the day where our survival isn't purely linked to our similarity,
but just to us existing.
Yeah. Just to our humanity.
Yeah.
Like you exist. I see you. You deserve to have peace, to have rest, to have access to things, and it not be contingent upon you showing up in the way that makes me comfortable.
Yeah, I do too. I think the other piece too that you're talking about of like this idea of, with the compulsory heterosexuality of people choosing to wait longer or choosing to never, fully identify as not heterosexual, right? And so I think I wanted to also kind of go back and with another thought with the compulsory heterosexuality piece, particularly with the people who maybe wait longer or like never, own another identity outside of heterosexuality. Because I think there's this interesting piece too of, we mentioned earlier the people on the down low. We mentioned like, women just making out to make out, particularly in like these club or party settings. And this additional idea of like people who identify as straight, as heterosexual, but then will maybe sometimes either have same-sex or divergent sexual attraction to other gender identities. And I think that's important too, because I don't want to limit to like just a cisgender understanding of like heterosexuality or homosexuality. But like there's this idea that like, oh, if I go off and get a blowjob or, fuck someone, I don't know, like at a bathhouse or whatever, that's okay. Like I'm still primarily this thing. I'm still like hold the heterosexual identity. And so I think that is also a really interesting piece, because I think that comes with some tension too.
Yeah.
With this idea of, I think of like having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah. Which I just personally, I do not like that saying.
Oh, you don't?
Because if it's my cake, now it's different if you were saying you want all the cakes that don't belong to you. But if it's my cake,
don't I get to eat it?
I get to do whatever I want with it. Why wouldn't I eat my cake?
That's
fair. But anyway,
that's
just a sidebar. Find another saying. It's my cake. Do what I want.
Okay, so that's a really great point, because I do love cake, and if you could give me some, I'm going to eat it. So why not? I think the idea for me is like this idea of you get to not only hold this privileged identity of heterosexuality, but you also then get to behave and have experiences and pleasure within this like same-sex or divergent sexual attraction from people who are not of the straight opposite sex. And so that thing that then creates this weird dichotomy too, and even in some classes that we've had discussions of people feeling really uncomfortable with this idea, because it's like you get to benefit from this thing while also enjoying this thing, but not.
We do that in so many other areas of our lives, though, when it comes to identity and access and, even ethnicity, race, and all this other stuff, right? We talk about folks who may be ambiguous, or, someone looks at them and they're like, I don't know where you're from, or they think they're one race and maybe they're biracial, multiracial, or something like that. And people talk about that, right? Like, you can be accepted in this community, and also you're in this community, but you don't experience the racism. Right? So this is really interesting conversation around oppression and privilege, and we all have to be oppressed. Right? As opposed to our earlier half of the conversation where we're like, why can't people mix and match and have fun and do whatever they want without labels? If that's what they choose. If this person is like, hey, I'm mostly heterosexual or straight, and sometimes when I go on vacation or when I go to a bathhouse or when I drink or whatever the case is, what is the issue with that if and when it is consensual and safer sex practices, and there's no deception happening, like this person isn't in a relationship with someone else and they don't know, you know, albeit unless they have like a don't ask, don't tell policy, which is something different. But if this other person is believing I'm in a monogamous relationship with someone and then you're out here doing all this other stuff, then that's a problem. But yeah, if you want to live this way, I don't really see the problem. I think the problem tends to be is that those parameters aren't being met. And there is a lot of harm and deception and violence and still like internalized phobias and shame, like that straight person, quote unquote, is now shaming queer people or limiting access for them, you know, things like that. That's typically what's happening. So let's speak on that. Let's not necessarily say, oh, it's wrong or it's, you know, a problem for someone to have a flexible sexuality, and say these are things that aren't being met that's causing harm that need to be addressed. It's how I more so see it.
No, I love that. Yeah.
And going back to the whole androphilia thing, you know, I was thinking about, especially now, one, because of social media. So back in the day, it wasn't like this because we didn't have so much exposure.
No.
But, you know, I can go to a popular person's page who's maybe masculine center, masculine presenting, or a stud or something like that. And in the comments, it's a bunch of quote unquote straight girls who just like, ooh, I think I'm gay, or I'm straight, but she could get it. Or what does it mean that, you know, this person is so hot to me? And I'm just like, it means you might be an androphile, but it also may not be. And that's okay. But it's just like, how do we give ourselves and people permission to just try on different things? Because also maybe there's nothing more to do with that. Like, we can look at people and experience attraction again and it not have to lead to a sexual behavior or even romantic outcome. But yeah, I think sometimes we just kind of really get stuck in the action of sexuality, which is so interesting to me because, you know, I've had people question like, am I gay or queer if I've never had a gay or queer relationship? And I'm like, we don't ask that of straight people. We have folks who have maybe never had a sexual experience with someone else, right? Thinking of the movie 40, was it 40 or 50-year-old version or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
No one, you know, it's not like a big to do of like, is he gay? Or how do you know you're really straight if you've never slept with a woman? That never happens.
It's always the opposite.
It never happens because that's the default, right? But if you are saying you're queer, but you've never had a partner or whatever, it's just like, how do you know? The same way that you knew before you had sex with anyone, before you kissed anyone, before you flirted with anyone, before you know, had someone flirt with you. You had an idea. You know, so.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like, also, I think of particularly like the bi-erasure of it all, when like a bisexual person might be with someone of the opposite sex and maybe hasn't ever had a same-sex like experience. And people are like, well, how are you bisexual if you never? Because I am.
Because I am. You are valid. Anyone listening who's in a relationship and they're pansexual or bisexual, whatever the case is, and people are questioning the authenticity of your sexuality because your your relationship appears to be straight presenting, none of that matters. What matters is what you say. Okay?
But yeah, I love that. And I love the piece too. And that's why I want to bring it up, because I think that tension of like straightness and heterosexuality, but then like the behaviors and all that stuff, I think is such an interesting piece that I also don't know we allow for that nuance enough either.
Yeah, we don't. We don't want nuance. You know, we want to be able to know with certainty what something is, because we've been taught and shown that our survival requires that certainty. But I just think it's something that we've expanded to things that don't matter, you know? Like, I'm just thinking, I don't know, I'm thinking of extreme example, like you live in a forest and you need to know for certain, is that a rock or is it a wolf?
Okay.
It's gray.
Yeah.
I need to know for sure what that is. So I know how to move. Valid. Makes sense.
Sure.
Certainty.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about sexuality and identity and having sex and having fun and putting people in boxes is not necessary.
No.
We need to be focusing on, is it safe, sane, pleasurable, consensual,
Right.
you know?
Unless they do want to be put into a box.
Unless they do. Unless, you know.
Literally. Okay, with that, let's take our final break and then we'll come back to wrap it up.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome back, y'all. We are so excited to have our first listener letter. We're really excited to have more of those too. So if you have questions for us, please go and find it in our bio on Instagram at the Soft Landing Podcast and share your thoughts and questions with us.
And the website.
And the website.
healingchange.com/podcast.
Thank you. So yeah, you can find submissions for all that at both of those places. So this is from Kevin this week. And Kevin's really wondering, how can he create space for himself to explore his sexuality? So what does that look like? How do we kind of cultivate that atmosphere, that almost like a laboratory of sexuality?
Ooh,
I know, just give it with that.
Sexual laboratory. I love it. You know, one of my first recommendations, if you will, practices is to release the pressure of having to practice anything specifically to explore or affirm your sexuality. So you do not need to get on Tinder, Grindr, or Bumble or whatever to start dating someone immediately. But start off with increasing your exposure and being curious through who you're following online. Maybe if you watch pornography, you can explore different types of pornography. If you read erotica, check out some erotic stories that can help with your curiosity around some of these identities that you're exploring. Go to workshops. Talk to, if you're in queer community, talk to them about some of their queer journeys and how they've explored. Ask for some of these resources, like, okay, because they'll tell you all the podcasts to listen to, all the books to read, the IG accounts to follow, the workshops that have been really affirming and healing and expansive for them. And if you don't have those communities, start finding those communities, right? Start to increase your circle and exposure to folks who are different than you, or who are maybe versions or flavors of where you think you might want to go, without feeling like, in order for me to know if I like this or if I'm this way, is I need to kiss a guy.
Right.
And, let's slow it down. And also that just may not be safe and possible for each other. Also reminding us that a lot of us were clued into our sexuality because of those earlier ways, because of who we were around, and, thinking about one of our favorite actors growing up, like, okay, I thought I liked them because it was an action person, but it was deeper than that.
Oh, yes,
right?
Absolutely.
Or I really like this person because of her style, and it was deeper than that.
Yeah.
So, like, remembering that a lot of us come into our sexuality not because we had a sexual experience, not because we kissed someone or we even held hands with someone. It's because we had that exposure. And so, taking off the pressure to jump into like the deep end immediately.
That is such a great tip. And it's even the last part, because I'm thinking back to like my childhood like things and when
your crushes and
because let me tell you again, I knew very early on, and it was probably because of like what I was seeing on TV, like Tommy Oliver from Power Rangers, like the White Ranger, baby.
Yes. Come on now. First of all, also, when you liked all of the Power Rangers, I think it was a sign.
Yes. There were many. I was like, oh, they are all just, all of them were just doing something for me. Aisha, baby. So, yeah.
That could be a light bulb moment for someone listening right now.
Oh, for sure. I think that is such a great point. And, Yes, listen to podcasts like ours.
Yes.
So, I'll give a little plug to please follow us where you
And
find
share.
podcasts and share. But yeah, I think that is such a great point. And especially taking that pressure off of the behavior of it. You don't, again, right, you don't have to do the sex to have the identity. You don't have who you are, how you feel, it just is.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything other than that. And so I think that that's a great way for people to also just to be more kind with themselves, to be more soft with themselves in their own process and along this path too.
And also reminding ourselves that sexuality, our sex and our sexuality are not one and the same.
Right.
Our body parts are neutral. Our body parts experience pleasure. It is not about the type, quote unquote, of sex that you have that means anything. And I say that because, people will make assumptions like, oh, if you have anal sex, then that means this about you.
Right.
And it doesn't. It just means that you've discovered the sensations of the anal opening and the canal, and it feels pleasurable.
Yeah.
That's it. And also because not everyone is sexual in that way.
Yes.
If they're queer or if they're not. So you have folks who may be asexual, who have no interest in being sexual with a person, but they do have a queer attraction, right? And that's fine. And so much emphasis on having the sex,
yes,
right, is really coming from compulsory heterosexuality, sexual compulsory, and yeah, it just erases so many identities and possibilities for folks based on who they are and where they are. So yeah, we have to kind of remember that, like, being sexual, everyone has a sexuality, but sexuality is a spectrum, and it doesn't have to look like one thing. Right. You do not have to have sex to be a sexual person.
Exactly.
Like how someone else's sexuality shows up. And I think that's just really important to remind ourselves, because I also know a bunch of queer folks who like queer men who don't have anal sex. Right?
Yeah.
So sexual behaviors, any type of penetration, intercourse is not necessary for you to, quote unquote, know if you like somebody, if you find them attractive, if you enjoy spending time with them, because all of those are valid markers of your sexual identity. So it's up to you to give yourself permission of where you want to go, how far you want to go, and you can change your mind. Maybe right now you're like, this is what I want to do, and then later you don't, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I that was one part I was gonna bring up, is like, even when it comes to sexuality and like the whole purpose of fluidity is that, 10 years ago you might have identified as straight, now you might identify as gay. 5 years from now you might be identified as bisexual. 10 years after that, maybe you identify as asexual.
Yeah.
And those are all valid points in your timeline and your existence of your current sexual being.
Yes, they do not. And they do not minimize or erase the 5 years before.
Exactly.
I think that's where, we have this loyalty to consistency in a way that just makes it so hard for us to explore. It's like, well, if I do this now, what are people going to say? They're going to say, oh, I thought you didn't like I don't know why I'm thinking about mushrooms, but like I used to despise mushrooms. And now I eat them. Anyway. But I've had situations like, I thought you didn't like mushrooms. Why'd eat them now?
Right.
But if I was so concerned about maintaining this identity or image, it's like, I have to just eat mushrooms by myself.
Right.
Things like that. So really giving ourselves first the permission to change our minds. And it does not make us wishy-washy or confused. It makes us falling more in alignment to who we are. And maybe who we are is diverse, curious people who enjoy switching it up.
Yeah. Why not?
Right? So
I love that. And I think the last piece that I want to touch on too is that difference between like romantic attraction and sexual attraction. And I think that's also a really important piece to remind people of, is that those are also on their own continuums. Like, you might be romantic attracted to one gender or multiple genders, and then be attracted sexually to only one.
Yeah.
Right. And and there are like these both very valid places for people to be able to play in as well.
Yeah, I love that reminder, because I know people try to invalidate that experience, or maybe they say, well, you're just not out,
Right.
or you're not brave enough. Like, for example, maybe someone who plays a lot with women, but all of their romantic, sexual, long-term partners are men,
right,
or vice versa.
Right.
And so this idea of like, oh, you're just confused, or you're just not really owning up to it, you know, it's just, again, putting people in the boxes. There are situations where people can admit, maybe I wasn't fully out, but other times just like, no, this is who I met and fell in love with.
Exactly.
So yeah, it just kind of goes back to, let's get out of people's way.
Right.
You know, let's not be a door on their path of sexual exploration.
So, sorry. Literally, people can say like 2 words, and I'm like thinking of a song. I was like, "Love is an open door" from Frozen. Love is an open door. Sex is an open door.
Yes.
You know, like it is.
Life
is an open door. Yes.
I love it.
Oh, love that.
Okay.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think essentially the big takeaway is be you. That's when you're the most beautiful.
I love that. Dang.
What about you?
Oh gosh. The limit does not exist. And that is a quote from Mean Girls. And I think it also applies here. The limit does not exist. You know, we can truly, if we're living in this expansive way of being, be anything and everything. Just be. Yeah. All right, y'all. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed this convo. Also, a reminder, we are doing something different with this podcast. We want to offer some resources for folks. So this week we have some really interesting inventories between the Klein Grid and also the Gender Unicorn, if you heard of either of those, for you all to really just sit down and explore with. And we'll provide some reflection prompts as well. So hopefully that will aid you in your own sexual exploration. And really take the opportunity to be a sexual argonaut. Yeah. So thanks again for listening to the Soft Landing Podcast, a gentle space for self-discovery. And if you're digging our content, please share with your people, subscribe to the pod so you don't miss an episode, rate and review us, and you can find us on Instagram at Soft Landing Podcast and at healingexchange.com/podcast.
And join us next week for a truly fun episode with our very first guest.
So excited.
As we talk all about sex clubs and dungeons.
Okay, bye y'all.
Bye.